We just had a consultation. We're not going to do a hymn right now. Did you ever wonder why we carry around, like in the Bible, we carry around 1,000 years of the history of the formation of the nation of Israel? We carry around the history of creation and we call them the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all that history, the Exodus, the wandering, like, why do we do that? We're Christians and the New Testament's only like that much, and some people don't even like to go into the Old Testament, but there's stories there, and if you learn them, or if you read them and learn them and take the time and sit down and wander through, there's some very, very profoundly basic, valuable lessons. And today, from 2 Samuel, the lesson is the sovereignty of God, which the fear of God, the respect for God is something that's very rare in our culture today, to have a reverence for God and what he's done. We're going to get into a little political history here. But first we're going to read our verses, and it's from 2 Samuel. We're going to start with verse 1, and then I'll go back and explain the, shall we say, the politics of it. 2 Samuel, verse 1, we'll start.
What chapter?
2 Samuel, chapter 1, verse 1. Thank you. So we're in 2 Samuel, and we're going to start with verse 1. We're going to read 1 and 2. Okay. After the death of Saul, David returned from defeating the Amalekites and stayed in Ziklag 2 days. On the third day, a man arrived from Saul's camp with his clothes torn, with dust on his head. When he came to David, he fell to the ground to pay him honor. "Where have you come from?" David asked. He answered, "I have escaped from the Israelite camp." "What happened?" David asked. "Tell me." He said, "The men fled from the battle. Many of them fell and died. And Saul and his son Jonathan are dead." We're going to jump ahead to verse 11. Then David and all the men with him took hold of their clothes and tore them. They mourned and they wept and they fasted till evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, for the army of the Lord, the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. And then we get to our verses that was actually prescribed in the lectionary for this Sunday, and we go to verse 17 of 2 Samuel chapter 1. David took up this lament concerning Saul and his son Jonathan and ordered that the men of Judah be taught this lament of the bow. It is written in the book of Jasher, which is not our biblical book. And here's the song. "Your glory, O Israel, lies slain on your heights. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath. Proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon. Let the daughters of the Philistines be glad, for the daughters of the uncircumcised rejoice." O mountains of Gilboa, you may have neither dew nor rain nor fields that yield offerings of grain. For there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul, no longer rubbed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the flesh of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back, and the sword of Saul did not return unsatisfied. Saul and Jonathan, in life they were loved and gracious, in death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep for Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and finery, who endured your garments with ornaments of gold. How the mighty have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies slain on your heights. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. How the mighty have fallen. The weapons of war have perished. David commanded that this song be learned and sung and repeated. But there's a problem here. David had been at war with Saul for 15 years. Saul, if you remember, was the first anointed king of Israel. The first anointed king of Israel. And David had such respect that Saul had been anointed by God. And here's how that anointing happened. Samuel, on the road, was traveling, and he was looking for some lost donkeys. And the prophet Saul was on the road looking for donkeys. The prophet Samuel came upon him and took, here it is, right from 1 Samuel. You don't have to look it up. The book of 1 Samuel is all about Saul's battles and history and his wars with David. So, has not the Lord anointed you to be prince over his people? And you shall reign over the people of the Lord. You will save them from the hand of the surrounding enemies. And it goes on to say, Samuel anointed him with a flask of oil. And then he gave these signs. You will find the donkeys. You will see a band of prophets singing, and they will come and they will give you a certain amount of bread. And all these signs. And your heart will be changed. And that was in recorded history. And he was the first king of Israel. And David would not touch what God had anointed. He had a great, deep respect for what God had done and anointed Saul king. He revered the king. And I said there was 15 years of civil war. There was strife. When David was a young man, he proved to be an excellent musician, a wise, intelligent person. He proved to be the darling of the people. He didn't come up through the regular political party. He was a darling of the people. They loved him. They sang songs about David. David, his armed band of men, would protect the farmers on the outer regions of Israelite. He was just popular. And people knew that he would be king one day. So David had the people not only of the southern region of Judah, but even the people of the northern region of Israel were having rallies and singing songs and wanting him to be king. He had the military backing, he had the political backing, he had the popular backing. But David would not touch God's anointed, Saul. In fact, during those wars, that civil war, those skirmishes around the land, David and his men had hide in a cave because Saul had brought a large army to hunt him down and kill him, to exterminate his political rival. And David and his men hid in a cave. And when Saul went in the cave to relieve himself, the Bible says, he didn't know it, but he was so close to David that David could have reached out and cut off the corner of his garment. I mean, David could have ended this rivalry right there. But that was God's anointed. He had a great, deep respect for what God had anointed, even though the man was his enemy and was trying to do him out. David had the courage to hold back, and to hold the things of God in high regard, high esteem. It was a tough time in history. Political battles were won with a sword. Presidencies weren't determined by debates or voting. It was power in the hand of the leader, violent power. David was, as you know, was eventually given the role of king, first of the southern part and then the northern part. But he would not touch the man who was trying to kill him, because that man had been anointed by God. David had the courage to wait. David had the courage to hold back. David had the belief and the faith that God was working behind the scenes to bring about his purposes. Well, the courage to hold back, the courage to respect what is sovereign and established by God. Respect for that. Well, that's a lesson from the Old Testament. And I want you to remember that. Courage to hold back. We want to jump into maybe politics or local business or we want to jump in and with our opinion or the popular opinion, whatever it is, why are they building a wind farm there, and why, we get. But let's keep our mind on things of God. Things of God. Pray for our nation. Pray for our neighborhood, our community. Keep our mind on things of God. Don't get pulled into, if I just do this one thing, I'll change the course of history. David had the courage to hold back and trust God. I'm not saying don't participate in our political system. That's not what I'm saying. Don't jump into killing by words. Jump into prayer for lifting up our nation. Well, that's a lesson from the Old Testament. Now we're going to look at courage to step forward. And that's from Mark 5:24 to 34. Mark 5:24 to 34. Mark 5:25 to 34, I'm reading from the NIV. Okay. This is from Mark 5, Gospel of Mark 24 to 34. And this is telling about a situation Jesus was in, and here it goes. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped as she felt it in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, who touched my clothes? You see the people crowding against you, his disciple answered. You can ask, who touched me? But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. So, the story says she'd suffered 12 years. The loss of blood for 12 years, I don't know if it's her monthly cycle or if she had some kind of injury or disease or area that wouldn't heal. We don't know, but to lose blood, the life is in the blood. That's your nutrients going in and your waste going out. Very vital. And she tried many doctors or remedies. And she was at her wit's end, I guess. But she heard about Jesus. She knew about Jesus, except we got a problem here. She's unclean. This is a Jewish community. If you're bleeding or have a sore, women's in her periods, you're unclean. You don't go in public. You don't go to the temple courts with the other one. You just stay away. You are unclean. Another thing is, a woman in that culture, a respectable woman, a normal woman, would not be out there touching a man that is not her husband. Like, that is just, no, you don't do that. That is like scandalous. This woman had to have the courage to step forward. And she stepped forward and she touched God's anointed. And she was healed. So I believe, to finish this sermon, I want us to step forward and do something we haven't done too much. Here in this meeting house, I'd like us to pray in groups of 2 or 3 or 4. 4, perhaps a man who needs to understand the sovereignty of God, or maybe a woman who needs healing or needs courage. Yes, I'm asking you as the church at Chenunda Creek Fellowship to get up and sit in a little group or whatever and pray. Maybe pray with people you're used to. Pray with somebody you haven't prayed with before. Maybe you just want to listen and silently. So think about this. Pray for, perhaps there's a man who needs to understand the sovereignty of God. And to pray for a woman who needs courage or healing. Got it? we're going to have a time of prayer. Maybe 3 or 4 minutes, so